Our feathered friends see the world differently. Through birds' eyes, things might look almost psychedelic to us, with heightened colours and fresh hues forming a surprising new spectrum. This hazy, citrus, and stone fruit accented IPA, with a mellow, soft, and silky texture, gives a similarly refreshing change of perspective. This week's episode is brought to you by the one and only Parrot Dog. Hazy IPA, Bird's Eye. Nice. Welcome back to the Design Principles Podcast. This week we have the first of our listener recommendation episodes. So, over the last couple of years, we've been asking listeners to message in on Instagram and email with their thoughts on what we should discuss. And we've plucked this one out of thin air and decided to give it a crack. So, this week we will be discussing architectural manifestos. Time to dive in. This week, we thought we'd come to you guys with a listener recommendation. So we've had a few listeners email in with suggestions for episodes. And one of the ones that we kind of found the most interesting was somebody asking about architectural manifestos and movements, and just wanting us to discuss those. So we thought we'd bring that to you, and probably take a look at it from a more modern day approach.
So modern. I thought that for a minute you were saying we had a couple of listeners. I was like, oh, dang, we're doing well.
Yeah, we've had
Thanks to a couple of listeners. Appreciate
probably
that.
like a dozen suggestions. Some pretty good ones.
What are we working with?
Have we got any haters yet? Because that's when you know you're really successful.
Yeah.
No, I haven't identified the haters yet.
So, Sam, have you written your manifesto yet?
Have I written my architectural manifesto?
Going to write a manifesto? Is that something that you see yourself doing in the future? Or what even is a manifesto?
Well,
by the way?
if we look back on it, so that's a good place to start. Like, what is an architectural manifesto? And essentially, I'll try my best to define it without using like ChatGPT or something. It's purely from kind of memory, but ultimately it was historically an individual, but then it kind of shifted into groups, take on a direction for design, art, literature, architecture, etc. So you've got things like the distill movement and like their creative demands. You've got like Frank Lloyd Wright and The Nature of Materials, for example. Le Corbusier's Ineffable Space. Those are kind of like classic examples. You know, there's a couple of ones that are considered the greatest, or like the most influential. And those are sort of like Le Corbusier's Towards New Architecture and Adolf Loos's Ornament and Crime. And they were sort of like these.
Are these books? A manifesto? I guess a book's probably a good way to really hone in your manifesto.
Yeah, like to be perfectly honest, I don't know how many of them were actual books, but rather like a series of lectures and theses, and key ideas and deliverables, and statements, really. You know, like you have those key classic less is more type mentalities that were essentially like those architects' direction. It was their manifesto, is what they were wanting to embody and deliver.
Didn't Lee have his 5 points towards new architecture? Like when people like really hone in specific, I guess, deliverables.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought that kind of what manifestos were, like 10 points to our type of architecture or blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so Corb's 5 points of architecture were pilotis, free facade, free plan, ribbon windows, and a roof garden. So he was basically saying that like all architecture should have had those 5 points as a minimum.
Your architecture sucks unless it looks like mine.
Yeah. Whereas then you kind of get like other people coming in there with like different views and different approaches. And you've got like the futurism movement, and where everything has to have like a moving function. And you can kind of see in a way like that sort of steampunky type nature has influenced architects like Kundig and things like that. But I'd be hard pressed for anybody to kind of come up with, or I'd be really interested to know whether anybody's kind of got like a modern take on a manifesto? Because a lot of these things we're talking about, they're sort of like in the early days of architecture. I mean, you could even go back all the way to like Vitruvius if you want to go like full classical. But has anybody really come up with a new approach, a new direction, a new vision, and really stood on principle for architecture like in the 21st century?
They, well, I'm not sure if they were Wellington based, but the architectural group, remember those guys? Did like a courtyard house up in Karori? I think they've got one. Society, the individual, techniques, beauty, politics, economics, philosophy, the magazine. I think those are like their chapters on of their one. And I think our good friend Guy Marriage made one, didn't he?
Did he make a manifesto, or was Guy part of that movement?
Oh, was that the Arc? What was that organisation?
The Arc House.
The Arc House. Was it the Arc House that had a manifesto?
But again, that was like pre-21st century. That was sort of like turn of the 20th century, where I think like that student movement was far more prevalent. And I think a lot of this, like these directions and manifestos and movements and things came from like probably more of a focus on the academic realm. Whereas now, I think now we're so much more focused on like delivering a real thing rather than just pure concept.
Yeah, I don't know. I would hypothesize that the manifesto is just moved to the about page on your website. I'm going to Google some about pages, and we're going to find out.
But that's it's a pretty wet manifesto. I don't think anybody's sitting there really like standing on principle or looking to like really instill architectural change in their about page on their website.
Well, I think people are.
But you're not wrong though. It could be like it's probably more in the form of like a blog or something. It's just essentially it's just like a writing about principles that you believe in, right?
Yeah, but that might exist. But almost again, to Lisa's point from last week's episode, is that permeating the architectural fraternity? When was the last time you guys picked up a piece of like a bulletin or a piece of architectural literature, or went to a film or something, and you looked at what they were presenting and went, holy shit, that's changed my whole approach to design, or that's changed my life, kind of thing. Like that's what I feel like manifestos are designed to do. And like, who's doing that these days?
I've just jumped on the Herzog website. Their ones, I think, are very manifesto. They've got 4 strong titles with a sort of a paragraph underneath. Obligations beyond the brief. Public and political. So they're talking about like their role and what they have to do within these realms. Open dialogue. Individuals grow. So we are committed to providing professional development on all levels, apprenticeships, internships, lifelong learning opportunities. So like, I think those are like kind of your quintessential manifesto sort of statements. We will do this. We must do this. We aim to do this.
Yeah, it's pretty funny though, because the stigma around like manifestos is that you have to kind of be accomplished in some sort of realm, and like you're a lot more likely to kind of like write a manifesto towards the end of your career once you've had like a whole lifetime of experience in that realm and perfecting that craft. Isn't it a bit like on the nose to come out and write a manifesto straight off the bat, like 5 years out of uni? God, guys, I've got some to inspire and communicate, and I've
Okay,
got a vision.
you
Like,
say
is that a thing?
Well, no, but like you say that, but that's exactly what these people were doing. Like I feel like there was so much more, I don't know, like gumption, for want of a better word. Like back in the day, like people were like coming straight out of university and being like, I'm going to change the world in architecture. And they genuinely tried to do that. And like, I cannot really think of anybody that's kind of come in with a hiss and a roar at a young age, like you said, being not in the twilight of their career, really looking to like shake up the architectural norm, other than maybe Bjarge. And
Yeah, well,
that's
there could be a whole bunch out there, but you've never heard of them because they don't have that reputation to fall back on, or any kind of established reputation. Like their work is just kind of And no
There would
one.
be a good cross reference. Like, when did these people like Lee Korb write his manifesto versus like what stage of his career was he? Was he 10 projects in, 20, 0? Like Herzog's got, I think on their website I found the highest number, 658. I really like on their website how they list what number each project is, which is outrageous. 658 projects.
So apparently Korb was 34 when he wrote Towards New Architecture.
Yeah, I was just about to
Your
say that.
age, is
Like,
it? How old are you, Gerard?
yeah, that's my age. Like, there we go. Case in point. Like, I'd say that Bjarke
What
was
have you been doing
probably
your whole life?
exactly like I feel like Bjarke was probably not a dissimilar age when he wrote what I see as being the last true modern manifesto, which is Yes is More, which I don't know if anybody's read.
Did he write that though, or did he get people to make
Well,
that for
it's
him?
been it's a Taschen book, but like it's it's about the firm, big. But like at that time, it was so heavily his voice, But like the whole premise of this, and this is where it goes beyond kind of what you're talking to in the Herzog outline, like what they're kind of saying is promises, like to what they'll deliver to potential clients, less so than how they're looking to like reimagine architecture. Whereas like the whole outline of Yes is More is essentially there's two polar opposites in the architectural profession. There's the total avant-garde, kind of papered, full imaginative, hard to realize stuff. And then there's the very nuts and boltsy, square box, tick boxy type results. Okay, I think that's a little bit black and white, but essentially what like the whole concept and the whole development of big is predicated around the merging of those two and how you can have imaginative responses, but that are still incredibly programmatic. And that's basically their whole shtick, right? It's outlined in such a clear and concise way that it really makes you consider the way that you approach architecture. And I'd say that's the last like formative piece for me anyway, that actually has influenced the way that I approach design.
So do you seek out manifestos to read to improve your own skills?
Nah, because there isn't any. Like that's exactly what I'm saying. This
So
is the
why aren't
last
those older ones
last
still
one.
applicable? The first and the last.
Good point. Why aren't they still applicable? I think,
They probably are.
they probably are to a degree. Like if we're looking at the Distill manifesto, like advocation, pure abstraction, primary colors, and geometric forms, why can't you lean into that? And I'd say there's a lot of people that still very much do, but I don't know. I feel like they're less influential these days because people are kind of just out there to do the thing. Or am I being a bit cruel to us?
I think I actually own that Le Corbusier Towards New Architecture and tried to read it at university and just didn't really understand a lot of what he was talking about. I should probably go back and try and reread it now that I've had a few years practicing.
Yeah, I mean, like a decade in practice, you're becoming a lot more informed.
Yeah. You'd hope so, anyway.
Maybe not. I just find sometimes things like that are approached better when you're actually interested in it.
Also, I've got to say, this all sounds great, but if, like, who has anything to write about? You kind of have to have thought process that is, I guess, has some level of depth to it. And you know what I mean? Like, everyone's kind of,
We're saying we're all too shit.
I don't know. I guess no, we're just like, we do small architecture. These guys are like doing like massive stuff. They've got like a lot. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I'd feel like too like insignificant. I don't know if I'd know what to write about. Maybe.
But
I think that's why there's no manifestos.
Is it like a thesis? I don't know. Maybe it is.
Yeah, it is. But like, I think Gerard, you're right. That's probably why there's no manifestos because we all kind of
we're all too scared of like the importance that it seems to embody.
Yeah.
Such and such wrote a manifesto, so I certainly couldn't.
But why not?
More like I probably wouldn't have anything to write about.
But then again, when you actually kind of like think about it, you probably do. And I think what you're more concerned about, Ben, and this is probably why people aren't like writing manifestos or looking to really hammer home new or alternative architectural movements, is they're like, oh, my realm or my circle of influence is too small. But even if you've got like a very small circle of influence, I don't know, say, Gerard, you write a manifesto and it's picked up by like 10 people in Wellington or something, and that's it. But it actually has a profound impact on them. I'd say that's still successful. That's still successful.
So we need to be practice writing like a bunch of mini manifestos.
Well, I just don't, maybe not necessarily manifestos, but I think maybe people need to, from an architectural point of view, maybe like kind of look at themselves and understand the architecture or their design style or what they're looking to achieve, or maybe outline what they're hoping to and actually like put it to paper. Because, and even if it's for yourself, but it's like public access or something, people may take something from that,
I'm getting a slight sense of deja vu. Did we talk about, this is kind of like goals for your practice?
Different. I don't think this is necessarily practice based, although it could be.
These are architecture goals. So like if you're a somewhat design focused architecture office, like these are going to be like your top 3 points of your to-do list. I want to create architecture that XYZ.
I think maybe a little bit different. I think that's more referencing kind of like that Herzog example that you.
Yeah, but those look for ones, I guess, of being on your about page, but ones that you write for yourself, goals that you don't really particularly show anybody.
Yeah, but I think it's obviously it's for you personally, but I think it's also a call to the profession to take that direction as well. Like you look at like the Bauhaus Manifesto, like Gropius called for the unity of art, craft, and technology. And so it's that call to arms from your profession to kind of approach something in a different way. And maybe like there's a slight blurring of the lines between manifestos and new architectural movements. I think they could probably be spoken about in the same light. But, like when has there been a conscious shift recently? You know what I mean? Like you think about the conscious shift from like modernism to postmodernism is very clear cut. Has there been something like that recently? Am I just kind of like naive to it? Or like, what are you guys' thoughts?
Art Deco is one of the most visually potent styles of architecture, isn't it? I don't know. I feel like we're in a weird globalized architecture sort of season where everyone's looking at everyone's work on Instagram. So everything's kind of slowly blending into each other.
The same thing.
Which I think's terrible and bad. The more you could not look at Instagram, I think, reference things around you versus somebody's beautiful looking house on Instagram.
It's an interesting point, Gerard.
Yeah, manifesto.
Yeah,
There's your
manifesto. Yeah,
exactly.
Don't stop looking at Instagram. But it's actually, but I mean, like, that could be it. That could be the extent of it. And you're right, Gerard. That global washing of architectural styles, so true. And that was really evident. And you can kind of you see it obviously, like scrolling through Instagram, looking at like precedents and all of those things. But it was super evident when I was at the Design Awards, and because everything's presented in one room at one time, right? And any single one of those projects, you got to plucked out independently and like cut and paste it and put it in New Zealand, and it wouldn't have been out of place. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And I think that's the case for a lot of architecture these days. So maybe that is the manifesto: is stop looking at your neighbor and start looking.
Well, at least like
maybe more inward.
Yeah, creating more of a New Zealand architecture. I don't know. Just everything has to be corrugated iron.
We do have a very distinct, particularly residential, distinct style, I'd say. Less so commercial. I'd say, although our commercial architecture is by and large quite plain.
I don't know. What do you think about our residential architecture as distinctly New Zealand?
I think like the strong like emphasis on like certain forms, the monopitch and the gable, and like use of materiality, like a strong like lean into natural materiality, I'd say is probably some of the key things that's distinctly Kiwi.
You still just described every building everywhere though, right?
I guess it's like, what's the difference? What's the difference between that and Scandinavia? Good point. What's the difference between that?
The difference is
Australia.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Sitting here looking out my window in Copenhagen, I can tell you the difference is density, right? New Zealand's just still so new. Well, I was wondering yesterday, I was like, how long is it going to be for, like, how long do you think it'll take for New Zealand to have, like, the level of density that you see, like, in these European cities, you know? Is it like 100 years where the recession planes just keep going more steeper and steeper and steeper till they're basically vertical, and then everyone is just building next to each other, like over here, which so you know essentially our cities do end up as dense as these cities, or is it just like never going to happen because our population is never going to reach that?
Interesting you
Or
say that.
just the urban sprawl is
Really
going to
interesting that you say
grow.
that, Ben, because I've got a little note here that I wrote down, and like one of the reasons why I thought that there's like fewer modern manifestos. I said it's like the decline of utopian thinking. So like it's the belief now,
Yeah.
like there's very little, like grand revolutionary visionary action.
Yeah, is that because like everyone feels like everything's almost already been done? Just not to, you know, to an extent, whereas you know years and years ago, like it was all kind of new and interesting, you know, scheming or town planning, urban environment layout, and you know, like some amazing stuff was like a huge thing. But
Well,
now
that
it's like, well,
grandiose was a goal, right? Like cities
yeah,
wanted to be traditionally, like cities wanted to be the most visible in the world, and that's why you have places like you know London and like Hong Kong or New York or whatever, that have like reached for the sky. Whereas I don't think that's a goal necessarily anymore. If anything else, we're looking at life a little bit more pragmatically, a little bit more naturally maybe, and like everything's kind of like slowed, like that fast rush to grandiosity is slowed.
so does that mean that the successful or the traditionally the successful manifestos are of the city scale, or are they, you know what I mean? Like, are they more grand? Are they bigger than just kind of like a house?
I think they could be taken in at any scale, really.
I think they are all pretty well. The two we've read through anyway, I think are very scalable, like the Bauhaus and Le Corbusier.
Yeah, totally. Like you could take that in like the Distill manifesto as well. Like that's purely aesthetic concept. That could be something as small as a pen or something as large as a stadium. So I think scale's maybe not so much the issue, Ben, as more like,
No one's reading them.
yeah, well, yeah.
Or we're
I mean,
kind of
like
like,
out of us three sitting around here right now, like how many manifestos have you read?
Well, since architecture school, one.
So I mean, like I think we've like figured out the issue here, why they're not working, because no
well,
one's reading them.
I'd argue Zipfel's Atmospheres as a manifesto.
What about that Chipperfield one? Was that a manifesto or what?
We're just maybe realizing that architects' books that they write are perhaps manifestos.
Yeah, and I think it's a blurred line between a monograph, which is more like a profile of a practice, which is what you were kind of talking to earlier, Gerard, and a manifesto, which I think is more of like a monograph is like we're an architecture practice, like Kirsten Thompson's books like this, her recent book, excellent book. If no one's read it, pick it up. But like that's like it's a practice and profile, but it kind of outlines the way that her practice has evolved and what they're looking to achieve and deliver. And that's less a manifesto than something like Yes is More, where that's more, okay, this is who we are as a practice, but like this is why we're like it, and everybody else should try to be like this kind of thing.
I wonder if the previous train of thought was kind of leading to this kind of diminishing of vision, I guess, whether globally or just New Zealand. Sometimes Wellington feels like there's no vision and we're just like putting in, just trying to keep the place running, just trying to keep the pipes alive, just trying to replace the pipes. Yeah, I think people are scared of vision and manifestos because maybe there's like this individualist aspect to it, which people seem scared of at the moment.
Is that tall poppy syndrome issue that we've got that we've already touched on?
I really think it is. It's
Yeah.
like, it's kind of ingrained into a lot of the processes behind projects as well. So like all our public buildings are kind of committee projects now, whereas you're not going to get like a Sydney Opera House through a committee. So like there's I feel like sometimes maybe there's less of a window for really beautiful individualist works of architecture where you might just spark something really special in the hopes of a committee coming to the same conclusion.
Well, it's interesting, Gerard, that you make that point, because I think that statement, and actually a little bit what we've talked about as well, that tall poppy syndrome, and like a little bit about application as well, sort of like woven together the threads of our sort of last three conversations, and maybe less so the Zuru one, but from this season. And maybe it is the fact that what we're coming to terms with, ourselves currently, like through the making of this podcast, is that we're maybe just kind of following the same path as so many others, and that maybe it's okay, and perhaps we should start to just put your hand up, put your voice out there, and be a little bit more strident and strong on whether that be design or concepts or whatever.
Yeah, be okay to stand out a little bit.
Yeah, totally, man. And I think that's a huge problem with us in general. It kind of goes back to what Lisa said in the last episode. We're really bad at putting ourselves out there. We need to be better at it. So why not do it with a manifesto? Why not do it on like a grand, with a grand statement or on a grand scale?
I'll start today.
But you're in the
I'll
right
start
place.
taking notes.
Well, you're in the right place for inspiration, mate. It's hard to be inspired to write, your grand manifesto in grey about to be daylight savings Wellington when you're swanning around overseas in Copenhagen.
I know, and it's nice and sunny, but hey, it is cold here, so you got that going for you over in New Zealand.
Yeah.
You just went and saw the big ski field yesterday,
I
didn't you?
did see the ski field. It's pretty stunning.
That's a hell of a
Pretty
proof of
epic.
concept.
Yeah, just the lifestyle over here in general is like pretty epic.
Did it embody his manifesto, or his like manifesto statement of yes is more?
100%. It's
Yeah.
massive.
But it does, right? Like, okay,
Yeah.
he could have just done a power plant, but he went,
Yeah.
I'm going to put a ski field on the outside of this thing, and there's a climbing wall up the side as well, right? Like, just
massive climbing wall.
like
I took
pile
a photo for you,
program.
Sam.
Thank you. Like pile program onto something, because why not?
Yeah,
Which
definitely.
I love, and I love that in the flesh it is a real proof of concept.
It's pretty interesting though, because we just came from Hamburg in Germany there, and it is, as you were saying before, Gerard, I don't know who was, originally designing these buildings, but like the new part of Copenhagen and the new part of Hamburg are really actually like real similar kind of architectural styles. I guess they're not that far apart, but it's kind of interesting that's becoming like the global.
How new
thing.
though? Like, is that post-war, or is that like new as in 21st
No, like
century?
new as in like
New.
within the last 20 years.
Yeah, right. So they are kind of that
It's all
global,
kind of merging.
that
It's
vanillarization of architecture globally is still everywhere.
Probably stems from this side of the world, but it's definitely kind of making its way around, and it is really good architecture, but it is, as Gerard says, like everyone's kind of copying to a certain degree.
Are there any, less so manifestos, but maybe movements, like are there any historical movements or previous movements in architecture that you guys still draw upon regularly?
I'm finding it hard to go past sort of like just mid-century forms and furniture and stuff.
It was a time that was pretty well.
Has got the fundamentals right.
Yeah, they kind of really nailed it. I'm the same in a way, but you don't see a lot of people leaning back into sort of like classical bend on your like
actually
Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian column situation anymore.
That part's true, and we've talked about this a whole bunch before, but man, like the decorative elements just really were like the pride of these buildings, and it's just, you walk around here and every single building has that aspect to it.
What about
postmodern? It was hard
though?
in structure, but we talked about this before, and I'm Man, I'd love to bring that back somehow. It's just so much harder. It seems so much more superficial with timber, you know, when you've got like amazing brick or stone elements that are just like so
Yeah, well,
grand.
we've
And
got some pretty like epic timber churches and stuff, which sort of tie in a lot of that. But I think like that perfectly segues into that Bauhaus manifesto, which was like talking about how architecture is like the height of art. Craftsmen back in the day used to get to work on buildings, and like you wouldn't get any of that detailing that you saw in like Gothic or classical architecture without like these extreme craftsmen or artists, sculptors that'd be working directly on a building. You don't really see that anymore.
No, you don't in general, but like I'd say that with a lot of like civic or public buildings, particularly in New Zealand, we're starting to see that a lot more.
Like a CNC cast mold or something. Like
Yeah, I guess there's
yeah.
not
being
stuff's not really being hand.
involved.
Does that
Yeah.
profession still exist though, Gerard?
Definitely. I follow lots of
who would do that?
well, it's probably more of like a thing that takes place in Europe more because they've got so many stone buildings to maintain.
Yeah. But even Europe has forgotten how to build a lot of these stone buildings.
Yeah, but you just got to go to the place where they all are, don't you? So like this in New Zealand, probably not. There's, I don't know, probably a handful. We have lots of craftsmen.
It'd be interesting to see whether post the completion of a building like the Sagrada Familia, and I can't really think of any other example that's spanned the course of time, you know, from a point where the level of craftsmanship that you're speaking to, Gerard, and having those artists on site molding everything, doing everything physically, to modern day where everything's a little bit more factory reset. And that's kind of like a perfect example of the merging of those two cultures and the realization of that building. Post that, I wonder if anything will come of it. You know, like will the skill set that's learned through that 100 and however many years it is that building's been under construction, do you reckon that will permeate at all, or do you think that's just a unique case?
Like, are those employees going to carry on with ample employment opportunities?
Well, and the researchers, and you know, the team behind that building it's insane, and the technology that they've developed specifically to complete it. Is that just going to be lost, or is there a mechanism for it to be like employed throughout modern building?
Yeah, they just need to start a church, a new church, just down the road.
Yeah, just start down the road.
Another 100-year church.
200.
Yeah.
Well, like, I wonder what the nuts and bolts of what they've learnt is, because like you're seeing a lot of precast elements going in, or are they all carved stone and then glued together or something? Or are
But
they?
is precasting?
Did they learn all this from a manifesto?
That's what I want.
Yeah, I mean, Gaudi kind of had a manifesto in a way, right? Like, it was like, you know, all of his stuff was influenced by the forces of nature, was essentially his whole bit. So I guess that's a manifesto to a degree, the force of nature on the built environment, you know. But do you think, Gerard, that like real hands-on, very intricate detailing, let's call them almost like the jewelers of the building industry type approach, is that where the real skill lies? Obviously it did traditionally, but like in the modern day, why can't precasting and CNC machining and 3D printing take that place? I mean, we're just harnessing new technology to kind of deliver the same thing, right?
Yeah, well, maybe decisions like this where you're thinking about going like a CNC route or a handcrafted route is perhaps where you need a manifesto.
Is this the DPP manifesto?
To change to help you out in these decision-making scenarios. It's like the Bauhaus one was like very strict. It was like architects, sculptors, painters, we must all return to crafts. And then he, funnily enough, like I don't know if I agree about this, but he says, for art is not a profession.
Yeah.
There is no difference between the artist and the craftsman. And
Gerard, you're still finding that out the hard way, though, eh?
I hate it and love it at the same time. The artist is an exalted craftsman. In rare moments of inspiration, transcending the consciousness of his will and grace, the heaven may cause his work to bloom into art. He makes the argument that artists should have a knowledge of craft, which I appreciate, which I think sometimes is lacking.
Is that where your skill set comes in? Both of you guys really, Ben with your building background and Gerard with your furniture making background. And my the one who's dragging the chain here. I don't have my
Get crafting, mate. Get crafting.
hands-on background. I like model making. Does that count?
Get to craft and
Love playing with Lego. My daughter's Lego is somewhere behind me. Is that enough?
I think so. Yeah, Lego's the modern marble sculpting.
Yeah, just Lego building. I mean, Biaga built an entire building based off Lego. I'll find it in here somewhere.
Was that the Lego, the Lego building? I mean,
Yeah, the Lego building. It is just Lego
the Lego
building blocks.
for Lego.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
Where's that? Is that Copenhagen or are you going to go, Ben?
I don't know actually.
Here you go. Can you guys see that? This isn't the Lego building, but
that's
they
not the
use
one I was talking
Legos
about,
to do like design development. It's really cool.
I quite like that style of big MDRDV style architecture, like the blocking. It's kind of like Minecraft eating away at something.
Yeah. I mean, it's the pragmatic followed by the form, right? Like it's the form following function. They're taking a programmatic piece and they're kind of like allotting to it all of its maximum constraints. And then they're going, all right, well, what can we do to this to make it better, basically? It's a very simple exercise. It's push, pull, twist, turn, flip, cut.
Yeah.
I think the beauty is in the distilling of the idea and then communicating it backwards in such a simple way. I'd be amazed if that was the exact design process.
Yeah, they're probably the absolute pinnacle of the architect post-rationalization.
I think
But
you need that.
they do keep it quite simple.
Yeah, and I think you need those diagrams sometimes to communicate something to somebody. Like, you got this strange object. Why are we doing that? How'd you get there?
And funnily enough, often like your thought process, I don't know about you guys, but when you're in concept design, you're constantly designing in the back of your head. Sometimes you'll jot it down on paper, or quickly like model something or get an idea out. But like oftentimes it's not happening, but you're generating that stuff always in the back of your mind. And so like post-rationalization does make perfect sense because often you'll come up with a solution and then you'll like backtrack mentally and be like, well, how did I get here? And and that's how you kind of like build that story or that narrative behind it. You're right, Gerard. Very rarely do you go, I do this, then I do this, then I do that, then I do this. And I'm done.
I have designed the building. It is done.
Maybe that's how AI will approach things in the future. Let's not get back onto that.
Yeah, I got told that in my first year of uni, I did something out of instinct, kind of almost apologized it to the tutor. I was like, oh, I don't know why I did this. I just did this. He's like, yeah, you do. Somewhere in your brain, you've had a reason. Now you just got to go figure out why you did that.
That's good from your tutor. That's better than some of the tutors that I had who were basically like, well, where's your processing? Where's your thinking? Where's your precedent? Like an idea doesn't come from nothing. Justify yourself, basically. And like ideas do sometimes just come from nothing. Like, you can have a design epiphany. That's fine.
Yeah. And like you are what you eat to a degree. So like your brain's, got its own little AI.
Yeah. You're influenced. And
we've got this whole bank of knowledge that you're blending shit together and coming out with something.
And that kind of leans itself to that vanillarization of like the global built environment, right? Where everything kind of becomes pretty normal across the board is because we're being fed on a regular basis, like through all of these devices and social media and all of this stuff, this same regurgitation of style and things. And probably why there hasn't been like such a strong like revolt to a certain style, because there hasn't been like a group of people or a school of thought that's been in isolation that hasn't been influenced by that's like simmering down under the surface, and all of a sudden they erupt with this brand new idea. I'd love for that to happen. That'd be super interesting. But
should we start out our own architectural style?
Yeah, should we just shut off our phones and just see where we go?
Post AI architecture.
See where we get to.
Slowly trying to develop a fat architecture.
Architecture.
Yeah, like Irwin, like a fat building.
Oh yeah.
Some hydroform buildings, that'd be nice. Some chubby buildings. Cute buildings. One of my favorite buildings is like biomockery, where you just like a
Do
duck
you say
building.
biomockery or biomimicry?
Yeah, no, not biomimicry, biomockery, where your building is just like, I'm going to make a building referencing a duck, and it's just a duck building.
It like looks like a duck.
That sounds a bit too literal for me.
Is that like old Frank Gehry's binocular?
Yeah, it's just hilarious. It's good, man. It's hilarious. I like it. Bring some of that to the built environment.
I feel like there's a lot of like Midwest.
Mockery.
I feel like there's a lot of Midwest kind of like American buildings that kind of lean into
Yeah.
that pretty heavily.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could do a mockery of that almost. Yeah, like I'm mockery. I'm going to reference a spec home by building.
Getting incredibly meta here, but this is it. This is the kind of thinking that you're required to have to develop a manifesto. You know, because if we just, and you've got to run with it. Like at any point, if you go, oh nah, people will think I'm an idiot, then your manifesto is never going to get any legs. Whereas if you just kind of like lean all the way in, then maybe you'll get somewhere. Who knows?
There's some there. There's some wings there. My duck building.
What about kind of to close? Have you guys got any thoughts about where architecture might go? You know, we've talked a lot about manifestos, a little bit about movements, but it'd be really interesting. I mean, like, I don't really even know what movement you'd call the current one, maybe the globalization movement.
Yeah, global. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think people sort of called it the sustainability movement, but I don't necessarily think that that holds true across the board.
Yeah, I don't think many of them are actually sustainable. They're just using that word.
Yeah, I think it's just that greenwashing concept, right? So, like, where do you think architecture might go? Have you ever thought about this?
Yeah, I think I could head down that path a lot further. Like, this is kind of why I'm so interested in art and interesting ways of form finding, in the hope that as people closer and closer into what they're creating, hopefully you can, I don't know, keep creating interesting things. But I think
Are you going to be gutted or stoked when someone steals your concepts?
People steal my ideas all the time, but I just haven't told them about it. You know, when you see something out in the wild, you're like, ah, shit, that was my idea. But
is that parallel thinking or is that direct?
No, parallel thinking.
Yeah.
It's when you think something's your idea, but you realize, you know, there's lots of ideas out there. It's just like, who's going to act on the idea?
Do you guys find that when you come up with a concept, like maybe a building concept or a detail or like a wee moment or something, and you're really proud of yourself and you develop it up, and then somebody next to you or somebody leans over your shoulder and goes, oh, I've seen that before, and then shows you a precedent and you're like, fuck.
Yeah.
I thought I was being original.
People actually do that to me to take the piss. I tell them an idea, so then they like, whenever they see something on Instagram, my friend Luke's done that a couple of times, where he sends me through something that looks exactly like a sketch I've drawn. I'm like, wow, are you serious? I thought I was original, but no.
But is that a fear of the movement that we're moving into? Is that there's no more original thought?
Well, I've referenced this before about, I don't think in this context, but when I was a child, I wanted to be an inventor. And I remember being real disappointed because, like, at that particular moment, I couldn't think of like a new idea. I think that's kind of what my whole existence is trying to be an inventor. So I'm out here in my workshop trying to create new things.
I think
it's easy to create a new idea. You just gotta, like, put yourself into it. So it's more about like a design mechanism and tricking yourself into new things that is like trying to tense your brain until you think of something new. And process. So like hydroforming, you lose control in the process intentionally, so you come up with something different.
It's funny because I feel like your approach, Gerard, and what you're looking to achieve is, and to your credit, to be honest, is the complete opposite in the way that the industry is moving, because I feel like it's heading in that, like back to the Zuru conversation, it's heading in that Zuru direction. It's heading in that mass scale, mass produced AI, press play, beep, boop, boop, Minecraft kind of direction, you know, rather than it being like really personal and process driven and like concept heavy and all that sort of stuff. And I don't know, I feel like that's the movement that we might be moving into.
Zero.
Yeah, well, just into Like, what do we call what out the end of this? You know, when
Yeah,
there's
I
a
think
huge
that
revolt in 50 years' time, and suddenly we're all living in mud huts again or something. But you know, like what do we look back on this time as? Like, do we see it as the generation movement, as in like just mass generation?
Possibility would be that because of all this new technology, we kind of start to create and find new forms, which I guess like a lot of people are already kind of working on.
Yeah, true.
Starting to pop up around the world.
It's a nice way of
Yeah.
thinking about it. It's a positive way of like looking at the use of technology. Maybe I'm like my view on the technology is a bit negative, but yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah, I think use it where you can. But I think I kind of see it all as kind of heading down the same path. But I think trying to make an active decision to go down the Walter Gropius route,
Yeah, nice.
returning to the crafts. So, but you know, we're gonna see where that road goes. See if it works. We could all be wrong. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm, in my mud hut for no reason.
So to finish up, guys, and we didn't do it last week with Lisa, but love it or hate it. Architectural manifestos. Do you love them or do you hate them?
I think bring it back. Like I did used to read Zumthor's atmospheres a bit, and an architect that I've been very influenced by, and then like influenced by a lot of architects like Holtrop and his sort of processes. So there are definitely things that I follow in other architects that they like speak about. So I think subconsciously there's a little bit of manifesto action in there somewhere.
Yeah, I agree. I love it. I think I don't engage with it enough because you kind of get caught up in your day to day a little bit. But I think like the capacity should be there to interact with the concept of manifestos and to delve more into maybe there are modern manifestos. We're just not out there looking for them that we should be looking at. So I love it. I'm going to try and make a change. Thanks for the suggestion. Whoever told us to talk about this.
Yeah, I'm definitely pro as well. I just have a hard time saying that because I haven't read a manifesto for a long time, so I feel it's a bit kind of fake. But yeah, maybe I do need to read some stuff.
But that's enough, and I think like listeners can probably take this on board as well. Is like we're probably all a bit, we're all a bit guilty of just falling into the everyday, rather than kind of seeking that extra bit of knowledge. So maybe that's it. Maybe the manifesto is to maybe the greater manifesto is to find outside influence or to increase outside influence or something. I don't know.
Or decrease.
Speaking of outside influence, if anyone has any good manifesto recs, definitely send them our way, especially like modern. It'd be interesting to read some modern ones, actually.
Yeah, it'd be cool if listeners have got any suggestions, putting them on the show notes. We'd love to know.
Send us in your own.
Or your own, yeah.
Yeah, I think we should get into that a little bit more.
Top manifesto.
You don't have to publish it and put it on Instagram for the world to see, but maybe even just distilling some of your own design intentions and ideas might be a way of keeping yourself in check, keeping yourself on track.
And helps you develop as a designer, like that iterative process and that learn, that succeed, fail kind of cycle. Succeed, fail, learn cycle is so important to developing as a better designer.
Yeah.
Nice.
Thanks for coming along.
All right, guys. Good chat.